Picking up where I left off last week looking at the Witch King Ring Wraith, today I'll be looking at another of ToyBiz's 12-inch action figure line, or special edition collector series as it was called, for Lord of the Rings. And today it is Galadriel's turn. And by now you will be familiar with the approach they took to the packaging. It is this very slim, narrow box. We have the green colouring. There are three colours used for these figures. There was green, red and blue, and these figures had this wonderful folding flap. The front of the box has this peephole in the shape of the One Ring through which we can see the figure inside, which is a really nice touch. The front of the box is mostly dedicated to the Middle-earth map, which is quite nicely styled, and then we have this production image of the character in which it is based on. In this case, of course, it is Cate Blanchett's Galadriel. Now if we look at the side panel, we can see that Middle-earth map, of course, wraps right the way around the packaging, which is a nice touch. We also have the logo, and here we have some almost random images of Frodo and some orcs. I've always been slightly confused why they took this approach. I think it would have been made much more sense stylistically and would have looked a lot nicer on the shelf, for collectors at least, to have actually had that image that we have on the front of the box, which always looks a little bit clumsy to my eyes. It would have been nicer to have that here on the side panel, and we could have stacked up our figures on the shelf and we could see exactly what character we're looking at. On the reverse of the packaging, we have that image that we see on the front of the packaging recycled here. We have a little bit of bio about the character, a little bit of information about the film, and at the top we have the silhouette, and this is individual to each specific film. So in this case, obviously it is the Fellowship of the Ring, so we can see those 9 characters on their journey. And then finally, if we open up that flap on the front of the box, again we can see the Middle-earth map taking up a lot of the space here, but it looks really nicely done. We have a little bit more information about the One Ring, which is pretty cool, and of course on the right hand side we have the window display showing off the figure in all its glory there. So this is really nice. I always love this approach with 12-inch or 1/6 scale action figures. I think it looks really nice, very presentable, and great to put on display. So looking at the figure itself, I think with the female characters there's always going to be a temptation to lean more into a doll type approach rather than an action figure approach, as we see with some of the more action oriented male characters. But first things first, let's look at this head sculpt. I actually think this is a pretty decent head sculpt for the time. We've got to remember, of course, this is a mass market release mainly aimed at children, all the way back in the very early 2000s. I actually think this is pretty decent for the time. I don't think it's spot on. I don't think it's a fantastic likeness of Cate Blanchett. I think there is a passing resemblance, depending on which angle you're looking at, but I don't think it's bad by any stretch of the imagination. There's some decent paint apps here. I quite like the rosy cheeks that we have. That's very subtle, but adds a little bit of colour and nuance to the face, which is great. I'm not so sure about the eyes. That looks a little bit not quite right, but it's not bad. Just maybe this isn't the best angle to look at it, but yeah, I do really like that they've actually opted to give her doll hair. I know this is a contentious point amongst collectors, but I actually think this works really well here, and I do like that they've given her a crown with that jewel in the centre there. Obviously it looks a little bit thicker, a little bit clunky by today's standards, but I think it works quite well for this particular figure. And if we look at the reverse of it, we can see it's actually quite intricate. It's a plastic piece, but it looks quite nice. There's actually some different colours going on here. We can see silver and gold, and there's a little bit of an intricate design here. So although it's quite simplistic, there is actually a fair attempt to do something quite interesting and detailed. Likewise, I do really like this hair, and they've made an earnest attempt to try and make sure that those locks are held in place, that they keep that waviness and doesn't become too wild. And I think this looks really good, but obviously you have to style it from a very specific point of view. You don't want to put this on display and reveal too much of the back of the hair because you can't see the strip. Alternatively, you can remove the plastic strip, but then you are going to obviously leave the hair to become quite frayed and wild over time. I really like the costume they've given this figure, though. I think they've put a lot of attention to detail in it. They've tried really hard to do something quite special with this figure. It's got different textures going on, different materials that they've used for the sleeves versus the main tunic. And I really like the embroidered waistband as well. And in fact, there's embroidered pieces all over this central tunic. And I think it works very nicely to give it a sense of depth and texture. And I think it looks really very good. There's actually a lot of detail here that you might miss on passing if you're not looking really closely. So I think that's really nicely done. I think that's one of the things about this series as a whole, is that they put a lot of effort into these costumes and they do look very nice. And interestingly, they've opted to give her these silk slippers as well. So I'm not sure if this is a screen accurate detail. I seem to remember her walking barefoot in the film, but hey, it's a nice little extra touch, and it doesn't stop her from standing freely. In terms of articulation, she does have a ball joint in the head, which means she can rotate her head from side to side, she can nod it up and down, and she can pretty much rotate it all the way around. I think this works pretty well all in all. I think this is very successful. Thankfully, because her hair is soft, there's no hindrance there that a plastic hair would have created, so a pretty good range of motion here. She's got ball joints in her shoulders, of course. There's arms kick up and out, there's an upper bicep swivel there as well, and there is a joint at the elbow allowing the arm to bend to just past 90 degrees, which is great. There is a swivel at the wrist as well, allowing that wrist to rotate 360 degrees, but there is no hinge, so it can't hinge forwards and backwards, sadly. She does have a joint in her upper torso, but I can't seem to get an awful lot of movement out of it actually. It does seem to be quite limited how much range this motion actually has. So there is a joint there, but it's almost redundant in my opinion. She does have hinged hips, so she can kick her legs out to the side, she can kick them forwards, and she can kick them back. It's very difficult to see beneath this skirt, but she also has a double jointed knees as well, so she can kick those legs right the way back, and there is a final hinge at the ankle that allows that foot to move forwards and backwards. Sadly, she doesn't come with any accessories at all, which is a real disappointment, but taken as an action figure on its own merits, I do think that this is a very nicely presented figure. I think they've done a very good job of trying to bring the regal aspects of the character, of the costume, to life. They've spared no expense when it comes to that costume. I think they've done a very, very nice job of it. I think there's some ropey elements, particularly that thing around her neck there, that sort of brooch. It looks, well, it's just pure plastic, and it looks a bit clunky and clumsy, certainly by 2022 standards, but overall, I do really like the approach they've taken to this costume. I think the fine embroidery and different materials they use for the main part of this costume looks really nice, and I think the figure looks really good in this collection with the other figures and put on display, despite having obviously a more simplistic approach than you'd expect from a high-end 1/6 collectible. But I think, again, for the time and the audience that this was made for, I think it's a very nice addition to this collection. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.